Good evening and welcome back to another slow, sleepy wander through the past. Tonight we are leaving behind the cold stone floors and the candlelight of older centuries and stepping into something warmer, softer, and considerably more self-satisfied. The private world of a wealthy American family in the 1970s. Picture shag carpet thick enough to hide a shoe, kitchen appliances the color of a ripe avocado, and a telephone that somehow required its own room to live in. This is not a story of kings or castles. This is a story of split-level homes, wood-paneled dens, and the particular, quiet smugness of a family that had everything a little too early. Before we drift into all that avocado-colored comfort, thank you to everyone who keeps this channel going simply by showing up night after night. If you're new here, welcome. You've picked an excellent evening to get sleepy. If you enjoy this kind of long, slow history, consider subscribing, though only if you actually want to. And if you're comfortable, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are, because it always seems to be a little past bedtime somewhere in the world. Now dim the lights if you haven't already, get settled under whatever blanket you trust the most, and let your body sink into the mattress. We have a long, unhurried night ahead of us, and nowhere in particular to be. Let's begin by wondering quietly together. What did comfort actually feel like in 1974? Was owning central air something you genuinely bragged about at dinner parties? Did a single wet bar really change how a man saw himself? Was a four-speaker stereo system truly worth twice the money, or just twice the noise? And could anyone really write a check for a microwave the size of a suitcase and keep a straight face while doing it? And now, gently, slowly, you find yourself waking up in 1976. You are lying in a large suburban home on a street lined with young trees and long driveways. The mattress beneath you is doing something strange. It is moving. Softly, rhythmically, almost like the tide. Because you, tonight, are one of the fortunate few who sleeps on a waterbed, and getting used to that fact is going to take the rest of this evening. Let's start there, in the warm, sloshing dark of your own bedroom, because that is where the luxurious life of 1976 truly begins. Your waterbed is, without exaggeration, one of the strangest status symbols a decade has ever produced. It is an enormous vinyl bladder filled with hundreds of gallons of water, sitting inside a wooden frame, and it weighs roughly as much as a compact car. The floor beneath it has learned to accept this fact quietly, though the joists occasionally creak in the night as if lodging a formal complaint. Underneath the mattress sits a small heating element, humming faintly, keeping the water at something close to body temperature, because a cold waterbed is not a luxury at all. It is a punishment reserved for people who forgot to plug it in. Movement here is an event. When you shift your weight, a slow wave rolls outward across the surface and reaches the far side of the bed several seconds later, the way weather arrives from a distant coastline. Sit down too fast, and your spouse is gently launched an inch into the air, caught somewhere between annoyance and amusement. It is less a bed than a nightly negotiation between two bodies and several hundred gallons of lukewarm water, and somehow an entire generation decided this counted as relaxing. There is also, always, the quiet dread of a leak. A punctured waterbed is not a minor inconvenience. It is a plumbing emergency taking place inside your own bedroom, usually discovered at 2 in the morning, usually solved with a vinyl repair kit bought specifically for this purpose, sold right next to the bicycle tire patches at the hardware store, because apparently enough people needed both. But this room is not just about the bed. This is the master suite, and everything in it has been arranged to whisper, quietly but insistently, that money lives here. There is a walk-in closet, an actual closet a person can walk into, rather than a single rod crammed behind a door, and this alone would have seemed almost indulgent to your grandparents, who hung their entire wardrobe on 3 nails and called it organized. The closet doors are mirrored, which doubles the size of the room and lets you admire your own reflection from the comfort of your slowly rocking mattress, like a monarch surveying a very small, very carpeted kingdom. The carpet itself swallows your feet the moment you step onto it. There is a small color television on the dresser, because watching television in the very room where you sleep was, at the time, considered faintly scandalous, a luxury bordering on decadence. And in the corner behind its own door sits the genuine crown jewel of the entire suite, a private attached bathroom. Not a bathroom you share with 4 siblings and a rotating queue of relatives, but one that belongs quietly and exclusively to you and your spouse alone. It has 2 sinks. 2. An entirely unnecessary luxury that lets 2 people brush their teeth at the same time without a single elbow being thrown, without a single muttered "just a second." Visiting relatives, upon discovering this, tend to go a little quiet, the particular silence of people doing arithmetic on their own bathroom situation back home. There may be a deep garden tub, large enough to actually lie down in, and a separate shower stall entirely apart from it, so that bathing and showering are treated bizarrely as 2 distinct hobbies requiring 2 distinct rooms. If wealth in 1976 had a single quiet, unremarkable moment where it revealed itself most clearly, it might be this: not having to knock on your own bathroom door and ask how much longer someone was going to be in there. So you rise slowly from your warm and gently rocking lagoon, plant your feet into carpet the depth of a meadow, and cross into a bathroom that belongs to no one but you. It is, by any reasonable measure, a fantasy, and for most families in America that year, it genuinely was. Let's step out of the bedroom now and into the hallway, because the comfort here does not stop at the door. Let's talk about the air. While most of the country spends a July evening sweating in front of a box fan that only pushes the hot air from one side of the room to the other, your home hums quietly with central air conditioning. Every room holds the exact same crisp, faintly metallic coolness, controlled from a single dial mounted on the hallway wall, a dial that, in most households, becomes something close to sacred. To understand what a genuine marvel this is, you have to remember what summer meant for nearly everyone else in America that decade. It meant open windows and folded prayers for a breeze. It meant a damp washcloth draped over the back of the neck. The truly lucky families had a single window unit crammed into one bedroom, roaring like a small aircraft engine and cooling perhaps 10 square feet around it, which meant the entire household migrated nightly into that one room and slept together in a heap, refugees from their own attic. Not you. Your cool air arrives from everywhere and nowhere at once, drifting invisibly out of vents cut into the ceiling and the floor. Walk from the kitchen to the den to the bedroom, and the temperature never shifts even slightly. It is always exactly 72 degrees inside your house, a permanent, artificial spring that you have simply purchased outright and now command at will. Guests stepping through your front door on a scorching afternoon let out a small, involuntary sigh the moment the cool air reaches them, a sound of pure relief they don't even realize they're making. The thermostat itself becomes, quietly, the most powerful object in the entire household. It holds more real authority than any single family member, and so it becomes the site of a slow, ongoing, deeply polite war. Your father believes it is set too low and the electric bill will prove it. The teenagers believe it is set too high and their bedrooms are unbearable. Someone is always drifting down the hallway to nudge the dial a single degree in their favor, and someone else always notices, and the argument resets itself, unspoken, every single day. And the cost, naturally, is spectacular. Running central air through a whole house in the summer of 1976 was something like leaving every window open and posting dollar bills through them one at a time. When the bill arrives, your father holds it at arm's length the way one might hold a small dead animal, makes a sound of genuine anguish, and delivers a short lecture about how, in his day, people simply sweated and were grateful for it. Then he goes and sits directly beneath the nearest vent for the rest of the evening. To the average family down the street, sweating through the night with a fan aimed directly at their face, a house that stays exactly 72 degrees regardless of the weather outside is nothing short of science fiction. To you, it is simply Tuesday, an unremarkable background fact of a remarkably comfortable life. You will not truly appreciate it, in fact, until the day you visit someone who doesn't have it, and spend the evening slowly melting into their sofa while trying to be polite about it. Now let's look down, because your floors are hiding an entire small world of their own. Wall-to-wall shag carpeting is not merely flooring in your house. It is a landscape. Deep enough to lose a set of keys in, deep enough that a dropped earring might never be recovered. It comes in colors nature never quite intended. Burnt orange, avocado-green, a brown that can only honestly be described as gravy. This is not the thin, practical carpet found in a doctor's waiting room. This is a plush, towering forest of fiber that swallows your bare foot up to the ankle with every step, a genuine sensory event each time you cross the room. Children treat it as terrain rather than flooring, building forts in it, staging battles across its shaggy plains, occasionally losing a small toy to its depths for months at a time, only to rediscover it, painfully, underfoot years later. There's a special plastic rake kept in a drawer somewhere, whose entire purpose is to drag the carpet fibers back into an upright, freshly groomed position after the flattening traffic of daily life. Because yes, your carpet requires grooming, the way a lawn requires mowing or a horse requires brushing, and there was genuine quiet pride to be found in a freshly raked shag carpet, however strange that pride might sound to modern ears. The color palette deserves its own moment of consideration. The decade looked at the natural world and decided its finest offerings were mud, moss, and slightly overripe fruit, and committed to that vision completely. These earth tones were chosen partly out of fashion, and partly brilliantly, because they hid dirt extraordinarily well, which is simply a polite way of saying that nobody could actually tell what had been spilled on them. In a home full of cocktail parties conducted over shag carpet, that particular feature was less a coincidence than a mercy. Because here is the honest secret of shag carpet. It is nearly impossible to clean. It absorbs everything, crumbs, coins, the occasional stray olive from a martini, pulling it all down into the fibers where no vacuum cleaner can quite reach, though yours tries valiantly every week, groaning and straining against a surface practically engineered to resist it. Spill red wine on a white shag carpet, and you do not attempt to clean it. You simply move a chair to cover the stain and never speak of the incident again. And yet, despite all of it, none of that matters, because the carpet is warm and soft and gloriously impractical, and it announces the moment a guest steps through your front door that this is a household with money to spend on comfort nobody strictly needs. Sensible families had linoleum. You had a floor soft enough to nap on. Let's follow that luxurious floor now into the true beating heart of the home, the kitchen. Every appliance in your kitchen has fully, unapologetically committed to one of exactly two colors, avocado-green or harvest gold. The refrigerator is the size of a small wardrobe and hums with the quiet confidence of an object that cost roughly as much as a used car. The countertops are laminate, printed to resemble something they are not. The wallpaper carries a small repeating pattern, mushrooms, perhaps, or roosters, and somewhere on a shelf, presiding silently over the entire room, sits a ceramic rooster that nobody in the family can quite explain the presence of. The color scheme is not really a choice so much as a national agreement reached sometime in the late 1960s and never seriously reconsidered. Your refrigerator is green. Your oven is green. Your dishwasher, should you have one, matches. The alternative, harvest gold, is a mustardy yellow-brown that somehow looked expensive at the time and now, decades later, resembles a stain that has simply never come out. You chose one shade and lived inside it faithfully for the next 20 years. The refrigerator itself is the undisputed ruler of the room, vast, humming, rounded at the corners, its chrome handle requiring genuine effort to pull open. Inside sits a small landscape of color-matched Tupperware glass milk bottles, a jar of maraschino cherries reserved strictly for the wet bar, and one mysterious foil-wrapped object at the very back that nobody in the household will claim and nobody will quite bring themselves to throw away. The door itself, held together by magnets shaped like pieces of fruit, functions as the family's entire administrative center, report cards, a handwritten casserole recipe, a child's crayon drawing of a house that looks suspiciously like this exact one. The countertops are laminate, that peculiar modern miracle printed to resemble stone or wood grain it has never actually touched. It is nearly indestructible, endlessly wipeable, and slightly too shiny under the kitchen light. Set a hot pan down on it carelessly, and you will leave a permanent scorched oval that becomes, forever afterward, a small piece of family folklore, the spot where somebody's aunt ruined the counter at Thanksgiving. And then there is the wallpaper, which has opinions of its own. Densely patterned, repeating endlessly across at least one wall and possibly the ceiling as well, because restraint was never a defining value of this particular decade. The room smells faintly of a percolating coffee pot, gurgling quietly on the counter, and of whatever is currently simmering low on the stove. A spice rack hangs on the wall, holding jars that will likely never be opened again but look wonderful regardless. There is a wall-mounted telephone in a matching color, its cord stretched long enough to reach every corner of the room, so that dinner can be cooked with one hand while gossip is conducted with the other. This is not simply a kitchen. It is a kitchen built for a family that entertains, which means naturally that it is stocked generously with gadgets nobody strictly needs and everybody somehow desperately wants. And sitting proudly on the counter, glowing faintly with menace and possibility, is the single most futuristic object in the entire house. Let's talk about the microwave. Owning a microwave oven in the mid-1970s was, in a very real sense, a form of quiet wizardry. Yours is the size of a small filing cabinet, weighs roughly as much as a bag of bowling balls, and cost more than a month's rent for most American families. It can cook a potato in a matter of minutes, which feels, genuinely, like sorcery. It reheats coffee in seconds, which feels a little bit like cheating. The physical presence of it is impossible to ignore. It dominates an entire section of the countertop, a great slab of brushed metal and faux wood trim, with a door that closes with a heavy, satisfying clunk, like the door of a small bank vault. There is no gentle electronic beep when the food is finished. There is a bell. An actual bell, ringing loudly, as though a small boxing match has just concluded somewhere inside your kitchen. The genuine mystery of how it works unsettled a great many people at the time, and the honest explanations only made things stranger. It heats food from somewhere inside using invisible waves. There is no flame. There is no glowing coil. And yet a cold cup of coffee comes out scalding within moments. To a generation raised entirely on fire and electric heating elements, this did not look like cooking. It looked like something closer to the occult, and plenty of people were, quite reasonably, suspicious of it. Your grandmother, in particular, is entirely convinced this machine is trying to kill somebody. She will not stand anywhere near it while it runs, certain that invisible rays are leaking out to sterilize the room, or interfere with some pacemaker she does not actually have. She watches it from across the kitchen with her arms folded, the way one might watch a snake that hasn't yet decided whether to strike, and she flinches every single time when the bell rings. In practice, nobody in the household fully trusts the thing, which is precisely why nobody uses it for anything particularly ambitious. In theory, it can cook an entire meal. In reality, it mostly melts butter, softens ice cream, reheats last night's coffee, and warms leftovers to a temperature that is either lukewarm or scalding, with almost nothing reliable in between. Someone, inevitably, puts a fork inside it and produces a small indoor lightning storm. Someone else microwaves an egg out of curiosity and redecorates the interior in a way that requires a full afternoon of cleaning and a stern lecture. It is, as much as anything, a source of household entertainment, a small ongoing science experiment that occasionally warms your dinner as a side effect. And when guests come over, you demonstrate it proudly like a small carnival act. A cup of water placed inside, boiling in under 2 minutes while everyone gasps and shakes their heads in disbelief. It cost a genuine fortune. It does relatively little. And it remains, without question, the single most impressive object currently sitting on your kitchen counter. Once the food is warm, at least, you never have to touch a dirty dish again. Let's meet the dishwasher. For nearly the entirety of human domestic history, washing dishes has meant standing at a sink full of graying, cooling water, scrubbing at a plate while the food fused itself permanently onto its surface, the water going tepid and greasy around your wrists. It was the chore nobody volunteered for, assigned as a punishment, argued over by siblings, and stretched out endlessly after every holiday gathering, when the plates piled themselves into something resembling a small, precarious mountain range on the counter. Entire evenings were lost to it. Marriages, quite genuinely, were tested by the question of who washed and who dried. And now, in your kitchen, a machine simply does it for you. You scrape the plates, arrange them into the neat little wire racks, add a scoop of powdered detergent that smells faintly of industrial lemon, twist the dial, and walk away. Walk away from dirty dishes entirely, without a second thought. The sheer freedom of it is almost dizzying the first few times you experience it. You could, in theory, be relaxing down in the conversation pit with a drink in hand, while a machine handles the single most tedious task in the entire household. And that, more than almost anything else in this house, is what wealth genuinely feels like at 7 in the evening. The machine itself is not remotely subtle about its work. It roars to life like a small, contained ocean, sloshing and churning behind its closed door, sending a low, steady rumble through the kitchen floor that you can feel through your socks. It runs for what feels like the better part of an hour, cycling through stages you cannot see and can only learn to recognize by sound: the wash, the long drain, a brief pause, the wash beginning again. Running it during dinner itself is simply not an option, since conversation would require shouting over it, and so it becomes an after-dinner ritual instead, humming quietly away in the empty kitchen while the rest of the family scatters through the house. Loading it correctly somehow becomes its own small domestic art form, and every member of the household holds strong, entirely incompatible opinions about the correct method. Bowls face down, someone insists. No, at an angle, someone else corrects. The big platters go along the bottom rack. That absolutely does not fit there. You have, more than once, watched two grown adults silently and wordlessly rearrange an entire load of dishes behind each other's backs over the course of a single evening. A slow, passive-aggressive ballet performed in front of a machine that was supposedly designed to eliminate this exact kind of conflict. And do not overlook its finest feature, the one that genuinely separates the comfortable household from the truly extravagant one: the heated drying cycle. Not only does this machine wash the dishes, it then blasts them with hot air until they are fully dry, meaning you never have to towel a single plate by hand. You have quite completely outsourced the entire concept of cleaning up after a meal. The dishes go in filthy and emerge clean, warm, and ready to be put away, having passed through the entire process without a single human hand ever touching them. There are, of course, occasional casualties. Something not marked dishwasher safe goes in and comes out warped, or melted at one corner, its painted pattern faded to a pale ghost of itself. A wooden spoon emerges cracked and slightly furious looking. But these are small, forgivable prices to pay for the larger miracle, and you pay them without complaint. But the dishwasher only handles what's on the table. What about the trash? Oh, you have a machine for that too. Here, arguably, is the single most gloriously unnecessary luxury in the entire house: the trash compactor. This is a machine built directly into your kitchen cabinetry, whose sole purpose in life is to crush your garbage into a smaller, denser, more manageable version of itself. You did not particularly mind taking the trash out a few times a week, and yet somebody, somewhere, decided the solution was to purchase an expensive, electricity-hungry appliance whose entire job is to squeeze that same garbage into a tighter shape. Sit with the logic of that for just a moment, because it is a perfect, tidy little monument to the excesses of the decade. The problem being solved is mildly annoying and takes about 2 minutes, a few times a week. The solution offered is a large motorized machine permanently installed in your kitchen, consuming electricity around the clock, that simply reduces how often you have to perform that 2-minute task. It is a machine built entirely to help you procrastinate on something minor, and it is, in its own strange way, magnificent. The ritual works like this. You pull open a heavy drawer, drop in the milk cartons and the coffee grounds and the crumpled newspaper, and slide it shut again. Then you turn an actual key, because apparently the manufacturers worried a curious child might otherwise climb inside and press the button, and the machine groans to life. A hydraulic ram descends slowly from somewhere above, and an entire week's worth of loose, fluffy garbage is pressed with tremendous, grinding force into a single dense brick. The sound is deeply satisfying and mildly alarming in equal measure. It groans. It creaks under strain. You can hear individual objects surrendering inside, the soft pop of a plastic bottle giving way, the papery crunch of a cardboard box flattening down to nothing. Family members gather, sometimes, just to listen when something particularly crushable goes in. Standing over the compactor while it works gives you a small, quiet, almost godlike sense of having bent the physical world briefly to your will. The end result is a garbage brick, a dense, compressed cube roughly the size of a loaf of bread and roughly the weight of a bowling ball. In theory, this represents genuine efficiency. In practice, you have simply concentrated an entire week's worth of household waste into a single heavier, more awkward object that still, eventually, has to be carried out to the curb by hand. You did not eliminate the chore. You made it heavier and less frequent, and somehow, that felt very much like progress. There is also the matter of the smell, which the compactor does not so much prevent as it does concentrate. Everything that would ordinarily have gone stale separately now goes stale together, marinating quietly inside a tightly packed cube in the dark. You learn eventually to empty it before that particular moment arrives, mostly. And yet, is any of it strictly necessary? Not remotely. A regular trash can, emptied slightly more often, would accomplish precisely the same task for free. Everybody in the house knows this, including you. But the trash compactor was never really about necessity in the first place. It was about the simple, undeniable fact that you could own a machine whose entire purpose was crushing garbage, and your neighbors could not. And when they finally came over and saw it in action, they went quiet with a very particular kind of envy. The kind reserved specifically for the gloriously pointless purchase. And speaking of appliances quietly doing your chores for you while you do nothing at all, let's turn to the oven. Your oven, mercifully, is the self-cleaning kind, meaning it heats itself to something approaching the surface temperature of a small sun, and simply incinerates its own grime while you sit somewhere else entirely and do nothing whatsoever. It is one of the smaller, quieter miracles tucked into this kitchen. Consider, for a moment, the horror this particular feature replaced. Cleaning an oven by hand used to be one of the most genuinely loathed chores in the entire home. An all-day ordeal involving caustic sprays, steel wool, and an unfortunate amount of time spent with your entire head shoved inside a greasy metal box, scrubbing at crust burnt on since some long-forgotten holiday roast, the fumes slowly stripping the enamel from your lungs along with the grease from the walls. It was reserved for the deepest of spring cleanings and dreaded for weeks beforehand. People genuinely rearranged their schedules to avoid it as long as possible. Your oven simply does this itself. You turn a dial. A small latch locks the door shut with a final, ominous click, and the appliance begins climbing in temperature, far past anything you would ever actually cook at, up toward a searing inferno designed specifically to reduce every splatter and drip inside to a fine gray ash. For hours, your oven becomes something close to a small household crematorium for old grease, glowing faintly, sealed tight, hissing softly to itself. You do not open the door during this process. Frankly, you're a little afraid to. The whole house tends to know when the oven is self-cleaning. A hot, faintly acrid, almost industrial smell drifts quietly through the rooms, making everybody slightly uneasy without quite knowing why. Heat radiates off the front of the appliance so intensely that the kitchen briefly becomes uncomfortable, and the central air kicks into a slightly higher gear to compensate, one expensive luxury quietly fighting another, somewhere inside your own walls. When it finally cools and the latch releases on its own, you open the door to find nothing left inside but a thin dusting of pale ash, which you wipe away with a single paper towel, feeling, for one small satisfying moment, like something of a genius. But the oven, remarkable as it is only the headliner. The true measure of this kitchen's abundance lives in the gadget drawer, that overstuffed, slightly chaotic shrine to single-purpose convenience. Pull it open, if you can manage to get it open at all, and take a look at the riches inside. Every single item in there replaces a task your grandmother once did entirely by hand, and everyone hums quietly with the same reassuring promise: you will never again have to work particularly hard for your own dinner. There is the electric can opener, mounted to the wall or squatting proudly on the counter, grinding open a can of soup with a low whir, sparing you the truly crushing labor of turning a hand crank for perhaps 8 entire seconds. There is the electric knife, a buzzing, vibrating blade that saws through the Thanksgiving turkey with the enthusiasm of a small power tool, occasionally with rather more enthusiasm than the situation strictly calls for. There is the slow cooker, glazed in a matching shade of avocado, into which a roast disappears each morning and reemerges, transformed by dinner time, while you are elsewhere entirely, quietly being wealthy. And then there is the fondue set. Oh, the fondue set. A small pot suspended above an open flame, into which you and your guests dip bread, meat, and fruit on long two-pronged forks. A ritual that is one part sophisticated dinner party and one part genuine minor fire hazard. It gets used, realistically, perhaps twice a year, always at some gathering, and always with at least one guest burning their tongue badly or losing a cube of bread forever to the molten cheese below. The other 363 days of the year, it simply sits in a cupboard, a small symbolic monument to a lifestyle you enjoy aspiring to. But a truly wealthy 1970s household is not only about labor saved in the kitchen. It is, just as importantly, about entertaining, and no serious host entertains without a proper bar of their own. Let's step into the den, where every self-respecting affluent family of this decade has installed a wet bar, a small dedicated shrine to cocktails tucked neatly into one corner of the room. Yours has a little sink of its own, a padded leather rail running along the front, mirrored shelving behind it, and enough amber liquor lined up to comfortably sedate a small neighborhood. There are highball glasses, a soda siphon, an ice bucket for cubes you've crushed yourself, a cocktail shaker you handle with the easy, practiced confidence of a man who has read the back of exactly one single recipe card and no more. The defining feature, the thing that genuinely makes it a wet bar, rather than simply a shelf with some bottles on it, is that little sink. This, more than anything else, is the whole point. Any household can line a few bottles up along a shelf and call it a bar. But running actual plumbing into the corner of your den, purely so you never have to walk 15 feet into the kitchen to rinse a glass or fetch water, is a genuine statement of priorities. It says, plainly, that you take the business of drinking seriously enough to have given it its own private water supply. That tiny faucet is precisely the difference between a man who happens to own some liquor and a man who owns a bar. The staging of it all is, frankly, theater as much as function. The shelves are mirrored deliberately, so that your modest collection of bottles appears roughly twice as vast as it actually is, a glittering little wall of amber and glass catching whatever light happens to be in the room. There is a padded leather rail along the front edge, quilted and studded, so guests can lean against it and imagine, briefly, that they are standing at a real establishment rather than in somebody's finished den. There are stools. There may be a small neon sign or a low-hanging lamp or a framed print of a martini glass on the wall behind it all. This entire corner of the house exists as a small stage set built specifically for the role of sophisticated host. The glassware alone amounts to a small science. You do not simply own glasses, you own a taxonomy of them. Highballs and lowballs, martini glasses, cordial glasses, a coupe, a special heavy tumbler reserved specifically for the good Scotch. Each drink demands its own correctly shaped vessel, and reaching for the wrong one in front of guests would be a small, quietly mortifying social error. There is a soda siphon that hisses and sputters dramatically when used. There is a shaker you rattle with far more theatrical vigor than is strictly necessary. There is a small set of specialized tools, a strainer, a muddler, a tiny curved knife for cutting lemon twists, most of which you do not entirely know how to use correctly, but own regardless. And there is the ice, which you crush yourself in a bucket using a small pick or a hand-cranked crusher, the busy clinking sound of it announcing to the entire room that drinks are officially being made. This is where you mix a Manhattan for guests who politely pretend to enjoy Manhattans. Your repertoire is genuinely small, a Manhattan, an old-fashioned occasionally for the adventurous, a whiskey sour, but it is delivered with total, unwavering confidence every single time. Nobody complains, partly out of politeness, and partly because the drinks themselves tend to be strong enough that the second one tastes just fine regardless of how the first one was made. It is sophistication. It is theater. It is, at its core, simply a countertop that exists so you can pour brown liquor in front of an audience with a little flair. And it is, without question, the beating social center of the entire house. The place the party naturally gathers, where small deals get discussed, where gossip gets quietly refined, and where somebody, without fail, ends up telling a long story that nobody actually asked to hear. And that audience, once gathered, needs somewhere to sit and something worth staring at. Let's talk about the television. Your television is not, strictly speaking, a television at all. It is a substantial piece of furniture that happens to have a screen embedded somewhere near its center. An enormous wooden console, standing on short legs, polished to a warm shine, dominating an entire section of the living room like a kind of small household altar. The screen itself is modest, a gently curved bubble of glass set into an otherwise vast expanse of cabinetry. You could set a drink on top of it, and often do. You could display a row of framed family photographs across it, and often do that too. It is the single largest object in the room, and it is treated, correspondingly, with a great deal of reverence. Moving it, should the need ever arise, is a genuine family event, requiring multiple people, careful planning, and a quiet acceptance that somebody may well pull a muscle in the process. This thing weighs roughly as much as an upright piano, and is, in practice, about equally portable. Once it is positioned in a room, it tends to stay there permanently, and the rest of the furniture arranges itself around it accordingly. Every sofa and chair angled inward, toward the screen, the way pews face an altar, because facing away from it would simply be unthinkable. The picture, when it finally warms up, is a small miracle in itself, and it takes its time getting there. The screen brightening slowly from a single glowing dot into a full image over several long seconds, as the tubes inside gradually heat to life. And the image, crucially, is in color, a glorious, faintly unnatural color, where the grass leans just a shade too green, faces carry a slight orange warmth, and every so often the entire picture drifts gently into a strange purple mood until somebody gets up and manually corrects the tint. But it is color, and in a country where a great many households were still watching the entire world unfold in grainy black and white, that fact alone marks yours as a household of some real standing. Then there is the small matter of channels, of which you have exactly 3, and possibly a 4th if the conditions cooperate. The signal arrives through the air itself, caught by an antenna that can only be described as temperamental. Good reception is a delicate, near-mystical art, involving the rooftop aerial or the rabbit ears perched on top of the set, which must be extended just so, angled carefully, and occasionally wrapped in a bit of aluminum foil to coax a clean picture down out of the sky. On a bad night, the image rolls or dissolves into static snow, or splits into faint ghostly duplicates, and one family member is dispatched to stand and hold the antenna in precisely the right position, becoming, for the duration of the program, a human extension of the television itself. And crucially, There is no remote control anywhere in this house. To change the channel, adjust the volume, or turn the entire set on and off, an actual human being must rise from the sofa, cross the room, and turn a heavy mechanical dial that clicks with a satisfying ka-chunk at every stop. This, effectively, is the household's evening exercise routine, and it is invariably delegated to the youngest child present, who spends the whole broadcast functioning as the family's living, breathing remote control. Get up. Turn it to channel 7. Get up again. Turn the volume down. Get up once more, the picture's rolling again. But the picture is in color. Glorious, slightly over-enthusiastic color. And that fact alone makes you the quiet envy of every household on the block still squinting at the world in grainy black and white. And soon, this magnificent piece of furniture is going to do something even stranger than showing you color pictures. It is going to start showing you television you actually have to pay for. For most of television's history up to this point, the entire arrangement had been remarkably simple. Programming came free out of the air, beamed to every antenna equally, paid for by the commercials everyone sat patiently through in exchange. Rich households and poor households alike received exactly the same 3 channels, caught by exactly the same kind of rooftop antenna. Television, in a country obsessed with status and comparison, remained stubbornly one of the very few things that money simply could not improve. And everyone, more or less, had quietly made peace with that fact. And now, into this tidy arrangement, walks a man offering to run a wire directly into your house, in exchange for a monthly fee for the privilege of watching more television. On the surface, this sounds like outright madness. Why on earth would anyone pay for something that has always fallen freely out of the sky? Your neighbors, understandably, think you've lost your mind entirely. Someone at a dinner party asks slowly, almost gently, as though speaking to a child, why you would possibly buy something you can already get for nothing. It's a fair question, and you don't really have a good answer, only a vague feeling that the future has quietly arrived, and it happens to cost a little extra this time. Then the cable technician comes and threads a strange new wire into the back of your television, connecting it to a small box, and suddenly your 3 channels multiply into many. There is a channel devoted entirely to news, running around the clock. There is a channel showing nothing but old movies, day and night. And then there is the true crown jewel of the whole arrangement, a brand new service that does something no television set has ever quite managed before. It plays an entire movie, start to finish, with no commercial interruptions whatsoever. Sit with that for a moment, because in the middle of the 1970s, it was genuinely, almost dizzyingly astonishing. A full theatrical film, uncut, uninterrupted, no jarring cut to a laundry detergent commercial right in the middle of the climax, no station identification breaking the mood. The movie simply plays from beginning to end, exactly the way it would in a theater, except you are sitting on your own sofa, in your own home, holding a drink you mixed yourself at your own wet bar, with no sticky floor beneath your feet and no stranger's elbow on the armrest beside you. It feels less like watching television, honestly, and more like the movie theater itself has quietly relocated into your living room, purely to serve you. There's a ritual that quickly develops around it. The films are announced ahead of time in a small printed guide, and the family begins planning entire evenings around them, gathering everyone together for the 8 o'clock movie the way an earlier generation once gathered around the family radio. The children, for once, are permitted to stay up late, because this counts, genuinely, as an event. Somebody makes popcorn. Everyone settles in, feeling for a few hours rather like a small household of minor royalty who have simply commanded entertainment to appear on demand. The mockery from the neighbors curdles, slowly and predictably, into envy. They come over one evening, they watch a full movie playthrough without a single commercial break, and their objections quietly evaporate on the spot. Within a year or so, more than half of them have run the same strange wire into their own homes, and paying for television, once the punchline of the entire neighborhood, simply becomes the ordinary way things are done. You, notably, were first. You understood somehow that the future was going to cost a little extra, and you were entirely willing to pay it. And once your eyes have been thoroughly entertained for the evening, it's time to give your ears the same treatment. Let's step over to the hi-fi system, the true pride of the living room, and the reason your father will not let a single other soul in the house touch anything on that shelf. This is not simply a way to play records. It is something closer to a shrine, a serious hobby that has fully disguised itself as furniture. It occupies an entire wall of the living room, a tall stack of gleaming metal components fitted with more knobs, dials, sliding levers, and glowing meters than the cockpit of a small aircraft. Every single piece was purchased separately, agonized over individually, compared carefully against its rivals, and then finally assembled into what the household reverently refers to as the system. Because a cheap all-in-one unit is understood to be strictly for people who don't truly understand music. And you, apparently, do. At the very center of it sits the turntable, where the record spins and a delicate needle rides carefully along its groove. Handling a record here is its own small ceremony. You slide it out of its paper sleeve using only your fingertips, touching the very edges alone, never the playing surface itself, because a single fingerprint becomes a smudge, and a smudge becomes a pop, and a pop becomes a tiny, permanent tragedy every time that particular track plays from that day forward. You lower the needle with the steady hand of a surgeon, because dropping it too hard scratches the vinyl and leaves a scar that will announce itself, faithfully, at exactly the same spot in the song, forever. Beside the turntable hums the receiver, the true brain of the whole operation, a heavy silver slab fitted with a backlit dial, and a long row of switches whose exact function nobody in the household can fully explain anymore, if they ever truly could. And there, too, sits the 8-track deck, that glorious doomed piece of technology into which you slide a chunky plastic cartridge that loops your favorite album continuously, occasionally fatting out abruptly mid-song with a loud mechanical chunk in order to switch tracks, always without fail, at the least convenient possible moment right in the middle of the best part. Then finally, there are the speakers, and the speakers are enormous. These are not modest little boxes tucked discreetly in a corner. These are great wooden cabinets, roughly the size of a small appliance, wrapped in fabric and genuinely capable of moving actual air across the room, positioned with something close to mathematical precision for the fullest possible sound. And if your household has gone all the way, if you have truly committed to the cause, you own not 2 of these speakers, but 4, because you have quadraphonic sound. Quadraphonic was, at the time, marketed as the next great revolution in home listening. Not merely 2 channels of sound, but 4, arriving simultaneously from every corner of the room, wrapping the listener entirely in music from every direction at once. In theory, it placed you directly inside the recording itself. In practice, only a small handful of albums were ever actually produced with true quadraphonic mixing, and the extra speakers mostly added a bit of ambience, along with a considerable amount of extra expense, before the whole format quietly faded away within just a few short years. But for right now, tonight, in your living room, it remains the absolute pinnacle of home audio, 4 speakers, twice the equipment, and roughly twice the quiet self-satisfaction to go along with it. The entire apparatus belongs, without question, to your father's personal domain, and he defends it with something close to genuine ferocity. Nobody touches the system. Every setting has been calibrated exactly to his taste. The volume, the balance, the tone controls, all perfectly tuned, and any deviation whatsoever is noticed immediately, without exception. Children are permitted to look admiringly from a respectful distance, but never to operate anything. Guests who reach curiously for a knob are redirected, gently but firmly, before their fingers ever make contact. But when the needle finally drops and the room fills, all at once, from all 4 corners, with sound so rich you can practically feel it settle around your shoulders like a coat, every bit of the fuss is instantly, completely forgiven. Nobody in the house fully understands how any of it actually works. The instruction manual alone, runs longer than most paperback novels. But it sounds, quite genuinely, like heaven, provided you can still afford the electric bill that comes with it. Now let's step down, quite literally, into what might be the single most emblematic room of this entire decade. Welcome to the conversation pit. This is a section of your living room floor that has been deliberately, intentionally lowered several steps below the rest of the room, ringed all the way around with built-in cushioned seating, so that guests can descend into a cozy, carpeted little crater and simply talk. That, genuinely, is the entire concept. Somewhere along the way, somebody built an actual hole in their living room floor, purely for the purpose of conversation. Consider, for a moment, the sheer confidence required to conceive of this. At some point, an architect looked at a perfectly ordinary, perfectly flat floor and concluded, apparently, that the real problem with it was that it was simply too flat, too easy to walk across without incident, too safe. The solution, naturally, was to carve out a square depression in the middle of the room, several steps deep, and line the sides with plush, built-in benches facing inward, upholstered in a fabric carefully chosen to coordinate with the surrounding shag carpet, so that guests could sit comfortably below the rest of the room's floor level and converse. It is intimate. It is genuinely architectural, and on paper at least, it is a rather lovely idea. And in practice, more often than not, it actually works. When it works beautifully. The pit draws a group inward and downward all at once, everyone's knees nearly touching, the ordinary world of the rest of the room rising gently away above the rim on every side. There is often a small fireplace built into the center of it, or a low coffee table, the lighting kept warm and low, the cushions deep and forgiving, and conversation, somehow freed from the awkward geometry of an ordinary living room, tends to flow more easily than it otherwise might. For a good party, the conversation pit becomes the true social heart of the entire home, a warm, upholstered basin where the whole evening quietly gathers and settles. But let's be entirely honest about the hazards here too, because the conversation pit is, undeniably, also something of a trap. It is, after all, a hole cut directly into your living room floor, and holes cut into floors tend to come with certain consequences attached. Every new guest, upon their very first visit, absolutely must be warned in advance, because the human eye simply does not expect the ground to drop suddenly away in the middle of an otherwise ordinary living room. The uninitiated approach it at a completely normal walking pace, reach the unmarked edge, and vanish downward, dropping 2 or 3 steps with a startled yelp and an expression of deep, genuine betrayal. It happens, without fail, at nearly every gathering, and has quietly become part of the evening's entertainment in its own right. Getting down into the pit gracefully requires a technique of its own, a sort of slow, controlled descent. And getting back out of it again after 2 or 3 cocktails is a genuine physical challenge that strips away nearly all remaining dignity. You do not so much rise out of a conversation pit as extract yourself from it entirely, using both hands, occasionally a knee, and quite often the shoulder of whoever happens to be sitting nearest, hauling yourself back up into the ordinary standing world above. Watching a group of pleasantly tipsy adults attempt this maneuver at the tail end of a long evening is, honestly, one of the purer small comedies this particular decade has to offer. There are other quirks too. Things fall into the pit, quite regularly, and simply stay there: crumbs, a stray olive, an earring, occasionally a small child, all migrating downward and settling comfortably among the cushions. Cleaning it properly is its own minor project, involving reaching into the narrow gaps behind the built-in seating that no ordinary vacuum can quite follow. And on the rare occasion that somebody forgets, mid-story, that the pit is even there, gesturing broadly and stepping backward without thinking, they simply disappear from view entirely, vanishing out of the conversation like a magician's assistant dropping through a trap door. It is, all at once, the height of contemporary sophistication and a genuine ankle hazard, and somehow it captures this entire decade in a single architectural gesture, a design that valued style and coziness, and a certain daring impracticality far above the boring, predictable safety of a completely flat floor. But the conversation pit is only where the entertaining begins. Let's head downstairs now, into the true promised land of this household. Descend the stairs into your finished basement, a genuine underground kingdom of leisure. Upstairs, your home carries itself with a certain elegance. Down here, that formality falls away entirely, because down here is simply where the fun lives. The walls are wrapped floor to ceiling in warm faux wood paneling. The floor, once again, is shag carpet, slightly less pristine than upstairs. And the ceiling is dotted with small square acoustic tiles that resemble, more than anything, a field of petrified oatmeal. Understand what the word finished is really doing in this context, because it carries an enormous amount of weight. Most families in the neighborhood have a basement of some kind, but for most of them, it remains a grim, unfinished space, bare concrete underfoot, exposed pipes running overhead, a furnace lurking silently in one corner, and the vague, persistent threat of spiders in every shadow. It's where the laundry gets done and the Christmas decorations go to hibernate for 11 months of the year. To finish a basement properly, to wrap the walls in paneling, to lay carpet across the concrete, to drop a ceiling in over the exposed pipes, and to transform the entire space into somewhere people genuinely want to spend time costs real, substantial money. And in a single stroke, it effectively doubles the usable living space of the entire house. The defining material down here is that wood paneling, and it is genuinely everywhere. Great sheets of it, printed with a wood grain convincing enough from across the room, though obviously plastic the moment you get close, cover every single wall in a warm, dim, cabin-like brown. It absorbs light rather than reflecting it, giving the whole room the feeling of the inside of a particularly cozy cigar box. Combined with a handful of small windows set high near the ceiling, and the near-total absence of any real daylight, the finished basement exists in a kind of permanent golden late-afternoon gloom. And somehow, that gloom is exactly right for what the room is meant to do, which is provide fun. This is the rec room, short simply for recreation, and it is dedicated entirely, unapologetically to leisure. There is a pool table at the center of it, heavy and green-felted, missing the 8-ball roughly half the time, doubling as a flat folding surface for laundry whenever nobody happens to be playing. There is a dartboard mounted on the wall, surrounded by a small constellation of stray holes punched into the paneling by throws that missed their mark entirely, each one a tiny monument to some past competitive evening. There may be a pinball machine flashing and dinging quietly in one corner, or a foosball table, or a folding card table where the adults play late into the night long after the children have gone to bed. And crucially, there is a second refrigerator. This, more than almost anything else in the house, is a genuine mark of true abundance. The refrigerator upstairs handles food. This one, humming away down here in the corner, is dedicated entirely to beverages, stocked generously with soda for the children and beer for the adults, so that nobody, ever, has to make the long climb back upstairs simply to quench a passing thirst. A second refrigerator, used for nothing but drinks, tucked away in the basement, is one of the small, unmistakable, quiet signals that a family has considerably more than enough. This is where the household naturally divides itself by generation. The children disappear down here for entire afternoons and full weekends at a stretch, staging their own tournaments, watching the second television, sprawled comfortably across the shag in a den entirely their own. And the adults retreat down here just as readily, escaping the more formal, more carefully arranged rooms upstairs to shoot a game of pool, tell old stories, and be somewhat louder than polite company upstairs would ever quite allow. It is, in effect, a whole second house pretending convincingly to be a single room, an underground world where the rules relax considerably and the drinks stay reliably cold. It smells, faintly and permanently, of basement, that particular cool, earthy note no amount of wood paneling can ever fully cover up, mixed together with beer, and old felt, and the ghost of 1,000 games played down here over the years. It is, by a wide margin, the most used room in the entire house, and simultaneously the least seen by any casual visitor. It is quietly the true engine of the whole family's leisure, but every genuinely well-off household eventually needs to leave the house entirely, and leaving requires a car, which, naturally, requires a garage. Let's head back upstairs and out to the two-car garage. And yes, the number 2 matters here enormously. Most families on the block are fortunate to own one car at all. You have room for 2 along with the lawn mower, and a workbench that will, in all likelihood, never see a single hour of actual work performed on it. And here is the real magic of the whole arrangement. You do not lift this garage door yourself, the way an ordinary person might. You press a small button clipped to the visor of your car, and the door simply rises on its own, as if greeting you personally. Consider that number 2 for a moment, because it is, genuinely, the entire point. A one-car garage is perfectly respectable. A two-car garage announces something else entirely. It says plainly that this is a household with 2 full automobiles at its disposal, which in the middle of the 1970s meant that both adults in the family could go their entirely separate ways at the exact same moment, a freedom that many families sharing a single car and coordinating their whole day carefully around it could only quietly dream about. The second bay is, in effect, a declaration of independence doubled, and the garage holds considerably more than just the 2 cars themselves. There is the lawn mower, naturally, and along the back wall there is the workbench. Ah, the workbench. Every suburban garage of any real standing has one, a sturdy table lined along the back with a pegboard, from which hangs a complete, gleaming array of tools, each one resting in its own carefully outlined spot, most of them never actually touched from one year to the next. There is a vise bolted firmly to one corner. There are old coffee cans full of assorted screws, sorted by absolutely no discernible system whatsoever. The workbench represents, more than anything, the fantasy of a handy, capable man who fixes his own household problems. A fantasy carefully maintained at all costs by a man who, in reality, calls a professional the very moment anything of real consequence actually breaks. There are other treasures tucked away out here too. A chest freezer humming quietly along the back wall, packed tight with a side of beef, bags of frozen vegetables, and a stack of popsicles for the kids. Bicycles hanging from hooks screwed into the rafters, Christmas decorations packed away in neatly labeled boxes, beach chairs, a cooler, a half-used bag of charcoal, all of it the accumulated equipment of a family with both the money to acquire things and the physical space to store them indefinitely. But the true marvel out here, the one feature that reliably stops a visiting guest in their tracks, is the automatic garage door opener. Understand that for most of history, arriving home meant stopping the car, stepping out, physically hauling a heavy wooden door upward along its tracks by hand, driving in, stepping out again, and pulling the door firmly back down, all of it performed, without exception, in the rain, in the snow, in the pitch dark. It was a small, tedious indignity, repeated thousands of times over a lifetime. Not for you, though. You approach your own home, and from the warm, dry interior of your car, you press a single small button clipped to the sun visor, and the door, sensing your arrival, begins rising smoothly on its own along the motorized track, opening itself to receive you like a drawbridge lowering gently for a returning lord of the manor. You glide inside without ever once touching it yourself. The very first time a guest witnesses this happen, riding along in your passenger seat, they genuinely gasp out loud, and you pretend, very deliberately, not to notice, because a magician never quite acknowledges the trick. It saves you, realistically, perhaps 9 seconds of actual time and an enormous quantity of quiet personal dignity. It is also, being distinctly early 1970s technology, occasionally rather temperamental and faintly sinister in its behavior. It sometimes reverses itself for no clear reason at all, or refuses outright to close, or begins descending while a child happens to still be standing directly underneath it. A genuine hazard that everybody in the household nonetheless treats with an alarming amount of casual indifference. But when it works correctly, and it mostly does, it remains one of the small, motorized miracles that quietly separates your household from all the ordinary door-lifting masses still living down the street. Now let's see what those two glorious garage bays are actually hiding, starting with the family's true workhorse, the great land yacht. Meet the station wagon, the mighty land yacht of the American family. Yours stretches out to something close to the length of a small fishing boat, seats what feels like the entire neighborhood at once, and is decorated down both sides with fake wood paneling glued directly onto the steel, for reasons nobody in the family has ever quite managed to explain satisfactorily. There is a rear-facing third row of seating in the very back, where the children ride backward, waving at strangers on the highway and slowly, steadily turning a faint shade of green. Let's take in the sheer physical scale of this vehicle for a moment, because it is not really a car so much as a small building that happens to move under its own power. It stretches on, a vast expanse of Detroit steel so long that parking it becomes a genuine navigational feat, and turning it around in anything less than a wide-open lot requires forethought, patience, and occasionally a second family member acting as a spotter. It weighs an astonishing amount, rides on soft, forgiving suspension that lets it float down the highway the way a boat floats over gentle swells, and it drinks gasoline with a thirst that would be genuinely alarming if gasoline weren't, for the moment at least, wonderfully cheap. The fake wood paneling deserves a full investigation of its own, because it makes no logical sense whatsoever and everyone accepted it completely regardless. Down both sides of your steel automobile runs a long strip of textured plastic, decorated to resemble the side of a wooden cabin, a decorative wood grain applied to a car, apparently meant to evoke some vague sense of rustic, old money charm, the kind associated with a proper country estate wagon. It is not wood. It fools absolutely nobody. It peels stubbornly at the corners after just a few summers baking in the sun. And at the time, it was considered the very height of style, a clear sign that you had sprung for the deluxe model, and you would not have had it any other way. Inside, the station wagon is something close to a cavern. The front seat is a single long bench, wide enough to comfortably seat 3 people across, upholstered in vinyl that turns molten in the summer heat and arctic in the depths of winter, branding the backs of any bare legs unlucky enough to make contact. The middle row seats 3 more. And then, gloriously, there is the way back, that rear-facing third row, the true wilderness frontier of the family car, where the children are exiled to sit facing backward, staring out through the tailgate window at the road unspooling endlessly behind them, waving cheerfully at the cars trapped behind, and slowly, inevitably, growing carsick from all that reverse motion. Let's talk briefly about safety, or rather the cheerful and near-total absence of it. Seatbelts do technically exist in this vehicle, but they are treated as strictly optional, buried deep in the seat cushions, ignored by virtually everyone. The children roam freely through the vast interior as it hurtles down the highway at speed, climbing casually between rows, lying flat across the back seat, sprawling out in the cargo area alongside the family dog, treating the entire moving vehicle as a kind of rolling playground, utterly unbothered by any concept of restraint whatsoever. It was, genuinely, a different era, and the station wagon stood as its rolling embodiment, a vehicle where children treated a car doing 60 miles an hour like their own private den. This is the true workhorse of the family, the vehicle that does absolutely everything. It hauls the weekly groceries, the entire little league team, the camping gear for a long weekend, a load of fresh lumber from the hardware store, the whole family plus the dog, and every piece of luggage for the long summer road trip, all at once if necessary. Fold down the rear seats and the cargo space swallows an almost unbelievable volume of stuff. It is endlessly, cheerfully useful, and you love it dearly, in the particular way one loves a large, slow, entirely reliable animal. It handles, honestly, a bit like a waterbed on wheels. It gets genuinely terrible gas mileage, and it is about as glamorous visually as your kitchen refrigerator. But it remains, quietly, the beating heart of the family's entire daily logistics. It is not, however, the car you show off with. For that particular purpose, you keep something parked in the second bay that cost considerably, noticeably more. Let's take a look at the real trophy, the second car, the one that exists for one purpose alone: to announce your success to the entire street. Perhaps it's a sleek, gleaming Cadillac with seats like a small living room sofa. Or perhaps it's a foreign import instead, something that made the neighbors whisper the very first time it appeared in your driveway. Either way, it has power windows you operate with one lazy finger, a full leather interior, and an 8-track player that will, without fail, jam and devour your favorite tape at least once a month. Let's be clear first about the actual job this car does, because it is not transportation, not really. The station wagon already handles all of that. This car exists for a single purpose, and that purpose is simply to be seen. It sits parked in the driveway on a quiet Sunday afternoon, gleaming, freshly washed and hand-waxed in a weekly personal ritual, announcing to every passing car on the street that the family living in this particular house has, unmistakably, arrived. Every single detail on it has been chosen for the sake of impression rather than practicality. If it happens to be a Cadillac, it is enormous and plush, a great glittering barge of chrome and soft vinyl roof, riding so smoothly that the road beneath seems to happen somewhere far away and slightly beneath you. The seats are vast, tufted, sofa-like cushions of leather or velour, and settling into them feels less like climbing into an automobile and more like being received graciously into a small, mobile living room. It has cruise control. It has full climate control. It has more sheer interior square footage than some modest apartments, and it wafts serenely down the boulevard in slow, wallowing luxury. Or perhaps, instead, you went the other direction entirely, the more sophisticated route, and bought a foreign import, something German or Swedish, sleeker and lower to the ground and noticeably quieter. A car that suggested, without saying a single word, that you had traveled abroad, that you understood real engineering, and that you were not merely rich, but genuinely tasteful with it. When it first appeared parked in your driveway, the neighbors gathered discreetly at their own front windows to whisper about it, because a foreign car sitting in a suburban American driveway in 1976 amounted to a small, quiet scandal, a clear announcement that you had not simply bought American the way everyone else on the street had. Now for the features, and these are genuinely delicious. Power windows, which rise and fall smoothly at the simple touch of a button, sparing you forever the ancient indignity of cranking a handle in slow, tedious circles like some kind of commoner. You operate them, quite deliberately, with a single lazy finger, purely because you can, raising and lowering the glass repeatedly just to feel the effortless motion of your own accumulated wealth. Power seats that adjust themselves with a soft, satisfying hum. Power locks, power everything. Each individual little motor stands as a small monument to the idea that no human muscle whatsoever should ever be spent performing a task some machine could handle instead. And then there's the 8-track player, mounted proudly in the dashboard, into which you slide your favorite cartridge to soundtrack your glamorous drives around town. It is a wonderful, doomed piece of technology. It plays your chosen album gloriously through the car's speakers, right up until the exact moment it doesn't, when it begins to wobble slightly, then to chew, and finally to slowly and quite irreversibly devour the tape itself, pulling the thin brown ribbon out into a tangled, hopeless nest inside the machine, eating your favorite album at least once a month with the appetite of a genuinely determined mechanical goat. This car is not practical, and it was never intended to be. Practicality is a virtue reserved strictly for the station wagon. This one exists for gliding slowly toward the country club, elbow resting out the open window, sunglasses catching the afternoon light, one hand loosely on the wheel, the very picture of a person who has, quite visibly, made it, and would very much like everyone else to notice. And speaking of things designed purely to be noticed, let's step out into the backyard, where your greatest boast of all sits quietly shimmering in the sun. Behold the backyard swimming pool, the ultimate suburban declaration that a family has genuinely made it. On a scorching summer afternoon, while most of the rest of the block fights over access to a single garden sprinkler, your family lounges comfortably beside your own private rectangle of chlorinated blue water. It arrived at staggering expense. It demands constant, ongoing care. And realistically, you will spend considerably more time skimming leaves and carefully balancing chemicals than you will ever actually spend swimming in it. Let's begin with exactly what the pool announces, because that's really its primary function. Anyone, after all, can be comfortably cool indoors with the help of central air. But a swimming pool is a luxury that lives entirely outdoors, plainly visible over the top of the backyard fence, impossible to hide from a single passerby. It says unmistakably that your property is large enough to spare the space, your household budget deep enough to afford the installation, and you're standing in the neighborhood high enough to justify installing a private body of water purely for the sake of leisure. It is, quite possibly, the single most legible symbol of suburban arrival available anywhere, a shimmering blue rectangle of pure, visible success. The installation itself was an ordeal of nearly biblical proportions. Enormous machinery arrived one morning and tore a genuine crater straight through your lawn. There was digging, and concrete and plumbing, and several long weeks during which your entire backyard resembled an active construction site, culminating in a final bill that made your father sit down rather heavily in his chair. When it was finally filled and gleaming under the sun for the first time, it was magnificent, and the true nature of pool ownership only revealed itself slowly, afterward, the way these things tend to. Because a swimming pool, it turns out, is not really a thing you simply own. It is a thing you tend to, endlessly, the way you might tend to a rather temperamental blue pet with a seemingly endless list of needs. You skim it constantly, drawing a long-handled net across the surface to gather the leaves and stray bugs and general debris that settle onto it, seemingly non-stop, a task that is never once truly finished. You vacuum the bottom of it by hand. You brush down the sides. You empty the little skimmer baskets, clogged reliably with assorted drowned things. The pool generates chores the way an untended garden generates weeds, and that long-handled skimming net effectively becomes an extension of your own arm for the entire summer season. Then there is the chemistry, an amateur science nobody ever really asked to learn, and yet everyone eventually does anyway. The water has to be carefully balanced, its chlorine level and pH monitored constantly and adjusted using little test kits and jugs of harsh chemicals, or else, quite quickly, it will turn on you entirely. Neglect it for even a few days, and the crystal-clear blue clouds over into a murky, unmistakable green, a small backyard swamp forming exactly where your prized luxury used to be, and clearing it back to blue again becomes a genuine, slightly desperate battle of shock treatments and careful measurements. You will, quite honestly, spend more total hours acting as an unpaid amateur pool chemist than you will ever spend simply floating peacefully in the water itself. But then eventually comes the payoff, and the payoff is entirely real. On a truly blazing summer afternoon, the neighborhood kids come screaming out through your back door and launch themselves off the diving board in wide, joyful cannonball arcs, the water erupting upward with every single one, and suddenly the whole enormous expense feels undeniably, completely worth it. Your own children, for one golden afternoon, are the neighborhood heroes. Your home becomes the destination. And every single family down the block suddenly, warmly remembers that they are, in fact, your very good friends, arriving with beach towels and a casserole dish, quietly hopping for an invitation to stay. That is the true social alchemy of the backyard pool. It converts staggering expense and near-endless labor directly into popularity. You skim it and you balance the chemicals and you scrub the sides, and then you watch the sheer joy of it play out in front of you, and you forgive it absolutely everything. A pool, in the end, is not simply water sitting in a hole in your backyard. It is popularity you can dive directly into. And right beside it already, the unmistakable smell of luxury is drifting quietly on the summer breeze. Let's fire up the grill. Let's step over to the backyard patio, the true command center of summer entertaining. While most families up and down the street are still coaxing sad, stubborn charcoal briquettes into flame with a squeeze of lighter fluid and a fair amount of patient prayer. You, meanwhile, own a gas grill, which lights instantly with a simple turn of a knob, like a small piece of everyday magic, and lets you approach the whole business of grilling meat with the calm confidence of a genuine professional. Let's honor briefly the ancient struggle you have personally transcended here, the struggle of charcoal. For an entire generation before this one, backyard cooking meant a bag of black briquettes, a can of lighter fluid, and a genuine test of a man's patience and pride, all rolled into one. You piled the coals carefully. You doused them generously. You struck a match and produced a brief, dramatic fireball. And then you simply waited and waited some more, fanning the coals and quietly cursing under your breath, while they slowly, reluctantly, entirely at their own leisurely pace, decided whether or not they would ever become properly hot enough to cook on. Dinner, more often than not, ended up late, slightly scorched, or faintly flavored with lighter fluid regardless. You, however, have leapt gracefully into the future. Your gas grill connects directly to a small tank of propane, and lighting it requires only that you turn a single knob and press the igniter, and with a satisfying little whoomp, flame appears controllable, immediate, and entirely abundant. No fluid required, no matches, no waiting around, no quiet prayer. You now command a genuine heat source the way you might command a stovetop, except out in the open air of your own backyard. And the difference in terms of dignity is genuinely immense. You are no longer a man out here begging stubborn coals to catch. You are, instead, a man who simply turns a knob and produces fire on command. This transforms you, quite completely, into the backyard's resident authority, and you assume the role with real enthusiasm. You stand before the grill in an apron, almost certainly printed with some slightly corny slogan, wielding a long-handled fork in one hand and a spatula in the other, a cold beverage nearby that you refuse, under any circumstances, to set down, presiding proudly over the searing of burgers and hot dogs, and on the more ambitious evenings, steaks, chicken, and a few ears of corn still tucked in the husk. Grilling, more than any other form of cooking, is the one that the men of this particular decade embraced with real, genuine enthusiasm, because it involves open fire, actual meat, and standing outside holding a drink. Which is to say, it was performance every bit as much as it was cuisine. Spread around the grill itself is your patio, the true outdoor command center, fully furnished for the occasion. There's a matching patio set, cushioned lounge chairs arranged for reclining, a low coffee table, and as the centerpiece, a large round table with a wide umbrella speared straight up through a hole cut in its middle, providing shade and a bold splash of color across the whole scene. The umbrella, without fail, is striped, invariably in some fashionable earth tone, and it tilts and cranks in ways that never seem to quite work properly, particularly after its first full season outdoors. Nearby sits a cooler, always full, mysteriously replenished throughout the evening, sweating steadily in the heat and packed tight with ice and drinks, so that nobody ever needs to make the long trip back inside the house. There are citronella candles and torches scattered around, meant to repel the mosquitoes, which they do not accomplish especially well, but which lend a genuinely festive glow to the evening as the sun finally goes down and the last burgers come off the grill. There may be a hammock strung loosely between two trees somewhere at the edge of the yard, a small bird bath, a set of lawn darts that were, honestly, a genuine safety hazard nobody thought much about at the time, and a general air about the entire yard of a household thoroughly built for leisure. This is where summer truly happens. Friends and neighbors drift over, drawn quietly by the smell of charring meat carried over the fence, and the evening unfolds gradually in a haze of grill smoke, easy conversation, and the steady clink of ice settling in tall glasses. You flip the burgers. You tell the same stories again. You refuse absolutely to relinquish either your drink or your spatula. And for these particular golden hours, you are, quite genuinely, exactly the man you always wanted to be. Now let's head back inside, because your house, it turns out, has a nervous system of its own, and it lets you shout at people through the very walls. Marvel, for a moment, at the home intercom system. Quite possibly the single most unnecessary and delightful upgrade in this entire house. Mounted on the wall of nearly every room is a small speaker box that lets you speak directly to any other room in the house, entirely bypassing the ancient, inconvenient business of actually walking there, or simply raising your voice and shouting. Dinner is ready can now be announced to the entire household simultaneously, in a crackling, slightly staticky voice, like the captain of a very heavily carpeted airplane addressing the cabin. Let's fully appreciate the beautiful absurdity of the whole device. The underlying problem it solves is that a house, by definition, has more than one room, and occasionally a person standing in one of them wishes to communicate something to a person standing in another. For the entire span of human history up to this point, people had addressed this exact problem in two perfectly reliable, entirely free ways. They walked to the other room, or they simply raised their voice. Both methods work admirably, cost nothing whatsoever, and have served the species faithfully since the very invention of the house. You, meanwhile, have had an actual electrical communications network wired directly into your walls in order to accomplish precisely the same task, at considerably greater expense. In every room sits a small wall-mounted panel, a speaker, a button, and a little grill wired throughout the entire house, so that you may press the button, lean in close, and address any single room, or every room simultaneously, your voice emerging from every panel in the house all at once in a small burst of crackle and static. The primary use, the true flagship application of the whole system, is announcing dinner. Rather than simply walking to the bottom of the stairs and calling up, or shouting the way any ordinary household might, the head of the household approaches the kitchen panel, presses the button firmly, and broadcasts the words "dinner is ready" to the entire structure at once. The voice arrives in every room simultaneously, slightly distorted, faintly crackling, sounding remarkably like an announcement over the public address system of a small regional airport. And there is, undeniably, something thrilling about it, a small sense of command, of reach, of speaking to your entire domain all at once from a single point. The novelty, unsurprisingly, is entirely irresistible to the children, who discover within moments that the intercom is, without question, the single finest toy in the entire house. They press buttons in distant rooms and make ghostly, echoing noises into empty hallways. They conduct crackling, staticky conversations between their bedrooms rather than simply opening a door and walking a few feet. They page each other with mock official authority, announce complete nonsense into empty rooms for no reason at all, and generally treat the household's expensive communication system as a plaything, right up until some exasperated adult uses the intercom itself to tell them to stop, which, naturally, only proves conclusively how fun the whole thing really is. Many models of the era offered one further, genuinely useful feature, a real upgrade to daily life. They could pipe music throughout the house, wired into a radio or connected to the great hi-fi system itself. The intercom could fill every single room with the same station simultaneously, so that music followed you seamlessly from the kitchen into the bedroom, and even into the bathroom, where even the shower now had a soundtrack, tinny and crackling but undeniably present. A small daily luxury that at the time felt genuinely, impossibly modern. There were quirks, of course, as there always are. The panel occasionally hummed with a faint background static even while sitting completely idle. Every so often, it would pick up some stray radio signal entirely by accident and murmur ghostly fragments of a distant broadcast into an otherwise quiet room late at night. And the particular button that let you listen in on a room without being heard yourself raised certain quiet questions about privacy that every family navigated with, shall we say, varying degrees of honesty. Do you strictly need any of it? Of course not. You could simply shout up the stairs like everybody else, at no cost whatsoever and with perfect reliability. But shouting is free, and this cost real money, and really, that tension sits at the very heart of this entire decade. Now let's talk about the other way this particular household loves to communicate in considerable style and across multiple lines at once. Let's pick up the telephone, of which, in your house, there are several, because a single telephone is really only suitable for a family that doesn't summer anywhere in particular. Your home has extensions scattered through multiple rooms, and at least one of them is a princess phone, small and sleek and gently illuminated, sitting proudly on a teenager's nightstand like a small glowing jewel. But the true flex, the one that genuinely separates you from the merely comfortable, is the second line, an entirely separate telephone number, installed purely so the children can occupy one line for hours at a stretch, discussing nothing whatsoever of consequence, while the adults still reliably receive their own calls. Let's first appreciate the baseline miracle of simply owning more than one telephone, because in 1976 this was genuinely not a given for most households. For the average family, there was exactly one phone, and it lived permanently in the kitchen or the front hallway, bolted directly to the wall, shared by every member of the household in full view of everyone else. Privacy in that arrangement was little more than a fantasy. Every call was conducted right in the middle of ordinary family life, with siblings eavesdropping shamelessly nearby and a mother hovering just close enough to ask, the moment you hung up, exactly who that was. To have extensions scattered through multiple rooms was to have something close to unimaginable freedom, the freedom of an actual private conversation, conducted behind a closed door. And the crown jewel among these extensions is the princess phone. This is not merely a telephone. It is, quite deliberately, a fashion object small, curved, and elegant, offered in soft pastel colors like powder pink and pale blue and cream white. It is compact enough to sit comfortably on a nightstand, and its dial glows gently in the dark, so that a teenage girl can find it by touch and place a call long after the household lights have gone out. It is marketed, quite openly, as jewelry for the bedroom, and it is coveted accordingly, the ultimate accessory for a young person's room, a small glowing symbol of their own arrival into the private, adult world of telephone conversations conducted entirely on their own terms. The physical reality of the telephone deserves a small note, for the sake of the modern mind. It remains tethered permanently to the wall by its cord, and you dial it by rotary, spinning a numbered wheel around fully for each digit and waiting patiently as it clicks its way slowly back into position, which means that dialing a single 7-digit number is a genuine, small investment of time, and dialing the wrong one entirely is a real, mildly frustrating setback. The receiver itself is heavy and satisfying to hold. The cord stretches, coils, and inevitably tangles itself into hopeless little knots over time. And a genuinely long cord, long enough to carry the phone with you into another room for a bit of privacy, is itself considered something of a minor luxury. But the true flex, the feature that genuinely separates the merely comfortable household from the truly wealthy one, is the second line. This is an entirely separate telephone number, an entire additional line run freshly into the house, and its sole purpose is pure, unapologetic abundance. Understand that in a perfectly ordinary household, the single shared phone line is a genuinely contested resource. When one person is using it, nobody else in the house can make or receive a single call, and nobody outside can reach the family at all. A teenager on a marathon call can, quite literally, hold the entire household hostage for hours at a time, while every outside caller gets nothing but a steady busy signal for their trouble. The second line simply dissolves this entire conflict, purely with money. Now the children can have their own number, tying up their own line for hours on end, gossiping and giggling deep into the evening about nothing of any real importance, while the adults keep an entirely separate line free for their own calls. Two full conversations happening simultaneously under a single roof, with no collision whatsoever. It is a small, quiet domestic peace treaty, purchased outright, and it announces plainly that this is a family with more than enough of everything, right down to the telephone numbers themselves. And when nobody happens to be home to answer any of these several telephones, a small machine stands quietly guard in their place. Let's meet it. Consider, for a moment, the answering machine, a small, somewhat mysterious box of whirring cassette tape that dutifully catches your calls whenever you happen to be too busy, or too important, to be sitting at home yourself. When somebody calls and you're out living your glamorous evening elsewhere, the machine clicks smoothly on, plays back a greeting you personally recorded some 11 separate times in order to get exactly right, and then records the caller's message after a single beep. Let's understand, first, the actual problem this small device solved, because it was a genuine and rather old frustration. For the entire prior history of the telephone, a call that went unanswered simply vanished into nothing. If you happened not to be home, the phone rang out into an empty house, and the caller received absolutely nothing in return, no message, no record whatsoever that they had even tried, no way of knowing you had missed one another entirely. Reaching a person by phone required them to be physically present, standing beside their own telephone, at the exact moment you happened to call. And if they weren't, you simply tried again later, and then again after that, a slow, frustrating game of telephone tag with no way whatsoever to leave a note behind. The answering machine changed all of that, through a small marvel of contemporary technology. It sat boxy and unglamorous, directly beneath the telephone itself, containing not one but two small cassette tapes inside, one holding your carefully recorded outgoing greeting, and the other sitting blank, waiting patiently to capture whatever messages happened to come in. When the phone rang and nobody lifted the receiver in time, the machine sprang quietly into action on your behalf, playing back your recorded voice to the caller, and then, after a single beep, recording their reply onto the second tape for you to listen back to later, whenever you got around to it. The single greatest cultural feature of this entire device, by a wide margin, was the outgoing greeting itself, and the crafting of it was an ordeal wildly out of proportion to its actual importance. This, after all, was your own voice, representing the entire household, played to absolutely everyone who called, and it needed therefore to be perfect. So you recorded it once, listened back, hated the sound of it entirely, and recorded it again. Your own voice sounded strange to you on tape, too high, or too stiff and formal, or too breezily casual. You stumbled over a single word halfway through. A child yelled something in the background at exactly the wrong moment. The family dog barked right on cue. You recorded it an 11th time and finally, grudgingly, settled on a version that announced to every future caller, with rehearsed and slightly false ease, that you were simply unable to come to the phone right at that moment. Some households treated the entire greeting as a small stage production in its own right. There were families who recorded elaborate little productions complete with background music, a scripted joke or two, both spouses taking turns speaking a line each, a small comic bit that was genuinely funny the very first time a caller heard it, and considerably less funny by the third. The answering machine greeting became, in its own small way, a genuine form of self-expression, a 15-second broadcast of the entire family's personality, agonized over at length and performed for an audience made up of literally everyone who happened to dial the number. To a great many people, particularly the older generation, the whole concept remained thoroughly baffling and more than a little rude. Why exactly would a machine talk on your behalf? Older relatives, in particular, remained deeply suspicious of the entire arrangement and refused, on principle, to speak to a recording at all, hanging up in a small, quiet huff the very moment they heard your recorded voice begin, only to call back later and complain at some length that they had tried to reach you and you simply hadn't been there. Talking to a machine felt strange to them and faintly impersonal, a small affront to the natural order of things, in which a phone call either reached an actual person or reached no one at all. But you understood the deeper, more sophisticated truth of the whole arrangement. Being genuinely unreachable on your own terms is its own particular kind of quiet power. Letting the machine catch your calls, reviewing the messages later at your own leisure, and returning them entirely on your own schedule rather than leaping up to answer every single ring the moment it happens, is to place yourself, in a small but real way, above the tyranny of the telephone itself. You were, after all, too busy, too important, too thoroughly engaged with your own glamorous life to remain permanently at the phone's beck and call. And once that glamorous life has actually been lived through, you will, naturally, want to document it, preferably right there on the spot. Let's talk cameras. Let's capture the moment, because you happen to own the technology to do exactly that instantly. In your hand sits a Polaroid camera, a device that spits out a finished photograph on the spot, a small square of genuine chemical magic that develops slowly, right before everyone's eyes, while the whole family stands around waving it in the air, an action which accomplishes precisely nothing, but somehow feels entirely essential regardless. Let's appreciate first what a genuine wonder instant photography truly represented at the time. For the entirety of photographic history up to this point, taking a picture was an exercise conducted almost entirely on faith. You took your photographs without any real way of knowing how a single one of them had actually turned out, removed the finished roll of film, carried it down to the local drugstore, handed it over the counter, and then waited days, sometimes as long as a full week, for it to be developed by total strangers, working somewhere in a distant laboratory you would never see. Only then, finally collecting the little paper envelope of finished prints, did you discover whether you had captured a genuinely treasured memory, or 24 blurry photographs of your own thumb. The Polaroid demolished this entire drawn-out ordeal in a single magical stroke. You pointed the boxy camera, pressed the shutter button, and with a soft mechanical whir and a click, the machine ejected a small square photograph directly into your waiting hand, right there on the spot, no drugstore required. And then came the small ritual that came, almost immediately, to define the entire era. Everyone gathered around and waved the photograph vigorously through the air, shaking it as though the motion itself might somehow hurry the process along, watching together as the ghostly gray square slowly, magically resolved itself into a full, finished image right in front of their eyes, colors bleeding gradually into existence over the better part of a minute. The waving, of course, did absolutely nothing at all. The photograph developed strictly at its own chemical pace, regardless of how vigorously anybody happened to be flapping it around, but everyone waved anyway, because it simply felt essential, because participating actively in the small magic seemed to demand some kind of physical action, and shaking the photograph quickly became one of the great, small, entirely pointless universal gestures of the entire decade. The finished photograph itself carried a distinctive look all its own, a soft, slightly dreamy quality, framed by a thick white border and a fat white tab running along the bottom edge. And it was uniquely and wonderfully instant. For the truly momentous occasions, birthdays, holidays, family vacations, you brought out the heavier artillery entirely, the Super 8 movie camera. This was a genuinely serious device, held carefully up to the eye, that filmed actual moving pictures of the family, capturing real motion, if silently and often just slightly blurry. Filming with it was treated as something of a solemn undertaking, because the film itself was precious and strictly limited in quantity. So you shot only in short, purposeful bursts, ordering everyone present to wave at the camera or do something interesting while they stood there, a little stiffly, grinning and waving obediently on command. But the true glory of the home movie was never really the filming itself. It was the screening afterward. The film had to be sent away and developed and returned by mail, and then on some special evening, the entire family gathered together for a proper show. Out came the projector, whirring and clattering and throwing off a surprising amount of heat, and a small screen was set up. Or, just as often, a clean white bedsheet was simply hung against the living room wall instead. The lights went down. The projector rattled slowly to life, casting flickering, silent, jumpy images of the family's own recent past across the sheet, while someone, usually your father, narrated over the mechanical whir, explaining who everyone in the frame was and what exactly they'd been doing at the time, as though it weren't already entirely obvious to everyone watching. The films themselves were silent, often overexposed, shaky, and full of people squinting directly into the sun and waving awkwardly at the lens. And they were, despite all of it, absolutely priceless, small, flickering windows into a summer already long gone. Your family's memories no longer waited patiently for a week at the drugstore. They now arrived in something close to real time, slightly overexposed and utterly, quietly precious. And when moving pictures alone are not quite enough, you turn, naturally, to the printed word, all 26 letters of it, arranged across an entire shelf. Let's admire the bookshelf, where a full set of the Encyclopedia Britannica stands proudly in matching leather-bound splendor. This is, in a very real sense, the internet, if the internet weighed roughly as much as a piano and cost about as much as a modest family vacation. Let's establish clearly what this object truly represented, because it stood, genuinely, as the single greatest concentration of accessible knowledge any ordinary household could realistically own. Long before any family could summon a fact instantly from a device carried in their pocket, information simply lived inside books. And the grandest, most comprehensive collection of general knowledge any family could bring directly into their own home was the encyclopedia, the sum total of human learning, or at least a genuinely respectable attempt at it, gathered together and organized carefully across dozens of thick, heavy, perfectly matching volumes, alphabetized faithfully from all the way through to Z, an entire small library's worth of accumulated learning. Bound handsomely in imitation leather and lined up neatly in a row, it arrived in your home, typically, through one of the great small performances of the entire decade, the encyclopedia salesman. This was a well-dressed man who arrived at your front door, sat comfortably in your living room, and delivered a genuinely spellbinding pitch about the future of your children. He opened a sample volume to a gorgeous, full-color illustration. He spoke gravely, at some length, about the deep importance of a proper education. He implied, gently but quite unmistakably, that any parent who truly loved their children and genuinely cared about their eventual success in life would surely find a way to provide them with this particular treasury of knowledge. And conveniently, he offered the entire set on a manageable monthly payment plan, because, naturally, no ordinary family could simply pay for the entire sum of human knowledge all at once, in a single sitting. And so you bought it, as much for what it represented as for anything it actually contained. You signed up for the payments, and several weeks later, the heavy volumes arrived by delivery truck, and you arranged them carefully along a shelf of honor in the living room or den, where their matching spines formed a single unbroken wall of learning, gleaming and genuinely impressive, a quiet monument to your family's stated commitment to the life of the mind. Visitors, stepping into the room, could not help but notice it immediately. It announced plainly that this was a household that valued education deeply, a home where children would grow up thoroughly surrounded by knowledge on every side. The reality of its actual daily use, admittedly, turned out to be rather more modest. In theory, the encyclopedia was meant to be consulted constantly, a genuine fountain of information for curious young minds, and the reliable settler of countless small dinner-table disputes. Whenever some argument arose about the capital of a distant country or the precise height of a famous mountain, somebody could march confidently over to the shelf, pull down the correct volume, and produce the definitive answer, settling the whole debate with the full printed authority of the page. In practice, the entire set gets opened, realistically, perhaps 4 times a year at most. The children, for whose supposed enrichment it had all been so solemnly purchased in the first place, quickly discover that consulting a heavy, alphabetized volume takes considerably more effort than simply not knowing the answer to begin with, and the encyclopedia gradually settles into a quiet second life as furniture, magnificent, and almost entirely untouched. Its single most frequent actual use, in a great many households, turns out to be structural. A stack of the heavier volumes makes an excellent improvised booster seat for a small child at the dinner table, and a single volume, propped open at the right angle, holds a stubborn window open admirably on a warm evening. But none of that ever really diminished its overall value, because its value was never truly about being read in the first place. It was about looking magnificent sitting there on the shelf. It was about quietly announcing a family's aspirations to absolutely everyone who ever walked through the front door, and looking magnificent, as it happens, is fully half the entire business of being rich. Now let's leave the house behind entirely, because the truly wealthy of this era did not simply live well at home. They belonged somewhere considerably more exclusive. Let's head over to the country club. Welcome to the country club, where your money buys you, above all else, the right to spend your leisure time surrounded by other people who also happen to have money. Membership here is expensive, deliberately exclusive, and that exclusivity is, quite precisely, the entire point. Because a luxury nobody outside your immediate circle can actually see is, in a very real sense, barely a luxury at all. Let's understand the fundamental logic underpinning the whole institution, because it is, in its own way, a rather beautiful piece of social machinery. Nearly everything else you've acquired so far, the pool, the cars, the endless appliances, provides some combination of comfort, convenience, or the simple admiration of your immediate neighbors. The country club offers something a bit more refined than any of that: genuine belonging. It is a private institution that admits certain people and quietly excludes everyone else, and the entire value of being on the inside of it depends directly on the fact that so many other people are being kept firmly on the outside. You are not merely paying, in other words, for a round of golf and a decent dinner. You are paying for the ongoing assurance that you belong among the right sort of people, and that a great many others, plainly, are not permitted to join you there. The cost of this particular kind of belonging is considerable, and quite deliberately so. There is an initiation fee, a substantial sum simply to be admitted in the first place, followed by ongoing monthly dues on top of that, an expense that continues steadily whether you happen to visit the club that month or not. And crucially, admission itself is never simply a matter of having enough money. There is a process involved. You must be properly sponsored, formally recommended, carefully considered, and finally approved by the existing membership. The barrier itself is very much part of the appeal, because a club that would readily accept anyone willing to pay the fee would, in the end, be worth very little to anyone. A club that instead makes you wait and prove yourself worthy first is worth a great deal more. Once you're safely inside, the pleasures on offer are numerous, and you tend to pursue them with considerably more enthusiasm than actual skill. There is golf, that grand, maddening game which you play rather badly across immaculately manicured greens, dressed in carefully coordinated pastels, losing golf balls steadily to the water hazards, and taking generous, entirely self-forgiving liberties with your own final score. There is tennis, played in crisp white outfits on courts kept in absolutely perfect condition, where the outfit itself matters at least as much as your actual backhand. And whether or not you genuinely excel at either of these games hardly matters in the end, because the real point was never athletic achievement in the first place. The point was always simply to be seen playing them, dressed correctly, in exactly the right company. The true heart of the club, though, is the clubhouse itself, a grand building where members gather regularly to dine, to drink, and above all, to socialize at length. And here occurs one of the club's genuinely great pleasures. You never actually seem to see a bill for anything. You sign for everything instead: a lunch, a round of drinks, dinner for a table of 8, all of it settled quietly with nothing more than a signature and your membership number. The entire vulgar business of actual money deferred neatly to a monthly statement that arrives later, quietly, safely out of sight. Signing for a meal, rather than counting out cash at the table, is itself a small ritual of belonging in its own right, a clear sign that you are a genuine member here, rather than merely a passing customer. The club hums always with a particular kind of energy, the quiet, comfortable satisfaction of exclusion successfully achieved. This is where business deals get quietly struck between rounds of golf, where reputations get gently polished over a round of cocktails, where the right connections are carefully made and the right people are steadily cultivated. The gossip, notably, flows considerably richer here than almost anywhere else. The whispered news of precisely who is currently up and who is currently down, among all the various families of local standing. Somebody's pool, apparently, is bigger than yours. Somebody's dining room is grander than your own. And every single corner of the club quietly reinforces that same comfortable, reassuring sense that you have genuinely arrived somewhere that not everyone else gets the chance to go. But even the country club, for all its considerable charms, cannot fully compete with the true ultimate flex of the entire decade: boarding an airplane and leaving the whole country behind entirely. Let's pack a bag. Let's go on vacation. And not this time, the pile into the station wagon and drive to Lake kind. You are flying on an actual jet all the way to Hawaii, in an era when air travel still genuinely felt glamorous from start to finish. You dress up specifically for the flight, because flying is treated as a real occasion, and the stewardesses serve you a complete meal on actual real plates, with real metal silverware, in a seat that offers genuine, comfortable legroom. Let's first mark out the real distance between this particular vacation and the more ordinary kind, because the gap between them is genuinely enormous. The typical family vacation of this era meant loading absolutely everyone into the station wagon and driving for hours, sometimes for days on end, toward a distant lake, or a national park, or a relative's house several states away. The children growing steadily more restless in the back seat, the entire trip a feat of quiet endurance measured out in gas station stops and roadside motel rooms. That, by most standards, counted as a perfectly fine vacation. This is a different species of trip entirely. You're not driving anywhere at all. You're flying instead clear over an ocean, toward an island most of your friends have only ever seen on a television screen. And the flying itself is very much part of the luxury, because air travel in 1976 remained a genuine occasion, and everybody involved treated it accordingly. You dressed properly for it. The men wore proper jackets. The women wore their nicest outfits. The children were scrubbed clean and dressed in their good clothes, because boarding an airplane was considered a genuinely special event, one you dressed for the same way you might dress for church, or for a wedding. The airport itself felt momentous, and stepping aboard the plane felt, honestly, like stepping directly into the future, into a gleaming metal tube that would carry you clear across the sky towards somewhere impossibly far away. And the experience aboard, by later standards, was almost unimaginably civilized. The seats were wide and genuinely generous, with real room to stretch your legs out comfortably. The stewardesses, as they were called at the time, were unfailingly gracious and attentive, and they served you a complete, proper meal on real plates, with real metal silverware and a folded cloth napkin, all of it simply included in the price of your ticket, as though that were the most natural thing in the world. There were drinks offered freely, and pillows, and a general, pervasive atmosphere of being genuinely, personally cared for while soaring high above the clouds on your way toward paradise. Then you land in Hawaii, and the paradise delivers fully on its promise from the very first moment. As you step off the plane, someone drapes a fragrant flower laid gently around your neck, a garland of real living blossoms, a welcome so warm and so genuinely exotic that it announces immediately that you have arrived somewhere truly special, somewhere most of the people you know back home have only ever glimpsed on a screen. The air itself is soft and warm and smells faintly of ocean salt and flowers, and you have crossed an entire ocean simply to breathe it in. The days that follow unfold slowly, in a pleasant haze of total ease. You lounge on beaches of near-impossible beauty. You sip elaborate tropical drinks, garnished with tiny paper umbrellas and skewered chunks of fresh fruit. You watch the sun set slowly over the Pacific in colors that seem almost invented for the occasion. You are pampered, thoroughly relaxed, and gloriously, entirely far from your ordinary life back home. And there is, admittedly, a particular satisfaction, small, and honestly a little smug, in knowing that while you drift here in paradise, your less fortunate friends and neighbors back home are dutifully watering your lawn and collecting your mail on your behalf. Air travel, at this particular moment, is not yet cheap, not yet miserable, not yet the tightly packed cattle call of removed shoes and tiny bagged pretzels and steadily shrinking seats that it will eventually become. For now, in this brief golden window, it remains a genuine luxury, an event, a glamorous passage towards somewhere truly wonderful, and you wear the whole experience remarkably well. But warm beaches, as it turns out, are only one particular flavor of expensive escape available to a family like yours. Let's trade the sand for snow. Now let's head for the mountains, because the truly wealthy of this decade maintain an entirely second, considerably colder vacation of their own. You are going skiing to Aspen, or to Vail, or to some slope carrying a name that costs a certain amount of money just to say out loud at a dinner party. There is a great deal of extremely expensive equipment involved. There is a lodge somewhere at the base of the mountain with a roaring stone fireplace. And there is, above all, a fashionable outfit that matters, quite honestly, a good deal more than your actual ability to ski. Let's establish the essential truth of the ski vacation right up front, because it is, in the end, only partly about the skiing itself. Certainly, there is real skiing available on the mountain, and certainly, some people genuinely do it. But the deeper, unspoken purpose of the entire trip is simply to be the kind of person who takes a ski vacation in the first place, to be seen in the right mountain town, wearing the right clothes, holding the right drink, radiating that particular glow of expensive winter leisure that only this kind of trip can really provide. The Hawaii vacation announced, plainly, that you could afford paradise. The ski trip announces something slightly grander still, that you can comfortably afford two entirely different kinds of vacation, one warm and one cold, and that alone counts as a boast of a considerably higher order. The destinations themselves are chosen partly, of course, for the quality of their slopes, but largely, if we're being honest, for the sheer prestige carried by their names. Aspen, Vail. These are not simply places on a map. They are words that signal money the very instant they're spoken aloud, mountain towns where the genuinely wealthy gather faithfully each winter, where a simple cup of hot cocoa costs a small fortune, and where everyone present understands, without needing to say so, that the expense itself is very much the point. To casually mention at a dinner party that you're heading off to Aspen this winter is to say something quite specific about yourself, and you say it with practiced casualness, watching carefully to see how it lands. Then there is the equipment, and the equipment alone amounts to a genuine small fortune. Skis, poles, boots that clamp your feet snugly into rigid plastic prisons, tinted goggles, insulated gloves, and layer upon layer of highly specialized clothing. All of it purchased, or rented, at genuinely spectacular expense, much of it destined to be used for only a handful of days each year before being carefully packed away and largely forgotten until the following winter. The gear itself is heavy, complicated to put on correctly, and honestly a little absurd to move around in, clomping stiffly from the car to the lodge in boots that make ordinary walking look like some kind of ungainly experiment. And acquiring all of it in the first place is very much part of the ritual, a substantial investment made purely in the appearance of being an avid, dedicated skier. But the outfit, The outfit is genuinely where the real attention goes. Your ski clothes matter enormously here, far more, honestly, than your actual skill on the slopes, and they are chosen first and foremost for fashion. The sleek one-piece suit in some bold, eye-catching color, the chunky, elaborately patterned sweater, the fashionable knit hat, worn at just the right angle, the entire ensemble assembled carefully to look genuinely magnificent, regardless of whether or not you ever actually point yourself down anything resembling a serious slope. On the mountain, and even more importantly around it, looking like a skier is most of the job, and you have dressed for the part with real, genuine care. And here is the honest heart of the whole matter. You will spend considerably more time at the lodge than you ever will out on the actual mountain. The lodge is, in truth, the real destination. A grand, rustic building centered around a roaring stone fireplace, deep leather chairs arranged invitingly around it, and a bar serving hot buttered rum, mulled wine, and cocoa quietly spiked with something a bit warming. This, genuinely, is where the real skiing vacation happens, gathered comfortably by the fire in your chunky sweater, cheeks pleasantly flushed from the cold outside, a drink in hand, trading stories about the slopes with people who have, in all likelihood, spent equally little actual time on them. You may manage a few real runs, cautiously, down the gentlest and most forgiving trails available, just enough to justify the equipment, the outfit, and the stories that follow, but the après-ski, the drinking and the lounging and the easy socializing that happens after the skiing, or often simply instead of it, is what you truly came here for in the first place. Skiing, in the end, is less a sport for you than a scenic backdrop for looking wealthy in the snow, and at that particular task, you excel completely. And when you eventually tire of traveling to expensive places rented by the week, you simply buy one of your own outright. Let's drive out to the lake house. Let's head, this time, out to the lake house, because for a family of your particular standing, one home is simply never quite enough. This is the getaway, a cabin or cottage that sits largely empty for most of the year, waiting patiently, faithfully, for you to remember it's still there. Let's fully appreciate the profound extravagance of the second home, because it may well be the purest expression of true surplus wealth available anywhere. A first home, after all, is a genuine necessity. Everyone, rich or poor, needs somewhere to live. A second home is a necessity for absolutely no one. It is a house you do not strictly need, situated in a place you visit only occasionally, standing empty for the great majority of the year, quietly costing money the entire time regardless in taxes, upkeep, and insurance, whether you happen to be there or not. To own one at all is to have accumulated so much that you have purchased an entire additional house, purely for the occasional pleasure of temporarily leaving your first house behind. The lake house carries a distinct character of its own, quite different from your polished suburban home, and part of its particular charm is that it is deliberately more modest, more rustic, a place where the entire family visibly relaxes its standards along with its schedule. It's a cabin or cottage set right beside the water, simpler in every way than your main residence, furnished with a comfortable mismatched jumble of older furniture hand-me-downs, and things that were never quite good enough for the main house, but always seemed a bit too good to simply throw away. Nothing here matches, and nothing here is ever meant to, and that precisely is the whole point of the place. It carries its own signature details. The small permanent touches that make it unmistakably what it is. There's a weathered dock stretching out into the water, sun-bleached and slightly rickety underfoot, where you tie up the little boat and where the children leap shrieking into the lake on hot summer afternoons. There's a small motorboat kept for puttering lazily around the water, or for pulling squealing kids along behind on an inner tube. There's a particular musty smell that greets you faithfully every single time you arrive and open the front door, the distinct scent of a building that sits closed and empty between visits, a smell no amount of airing out ever quite manages to fully banish. And there is, without fail, a drawer somewhere stuffed full of old playing cards and board games, At least one deck permanently missing a card or two. At least one game missing some small crucial piece. Because the lake house is exactly where you go to play cards together on a rainy afternoon, and exactly where small things quietly, permanently go missing forever. Life at the lake moves at a noticeably different, slower pace. The elaborate conveniences of your main suburban home are largely absent out here, and that absence, more often than not, is entirely welcome. You fish quietly off the end of the dock. You paddle lazily around in the little boat. You sit out on the porch in the evening and simply watch the water, and then the sunset. The children run freely in a way they simply cannot back in the carefully manicured suburbs, catching frogs, building forts in the woods, staying outside until well after dark without anyone worrying much about it. The days blur together pleasantly, entirely unstructured, and the whole point really is that nothing much happens out here, and nothing much particularly needs to. And yet the underlying mathematics of the whole arrangement remain gloriously, almost comically absurd. You visit realistically perhaps 6 weekends a year, along with a handful of full summer weeks and maybe one stray autumn escape. And for every other day of the entire calendar year, the vast majority of it, the house simply sits there, dark, quiet, and steadily accumulating that same musty smell, waiting patiently for your return. It is, by any honest measure, a spectacularly inefficient use of money, an entire additional house standing idle for most of the year. And that very inefficiency is precisely what makes it such a powerful, unmistakable signal of real wealth. It is relaxation you can hold an actual deed to, but maintaining all of this, the main house, the pool, the impeccably raked carpet, the second home sitting quietly by the lake, takes an enormous amount of ongoing work. And you, fortunately for you, do not do very much of that work yourself. Someone else handles it. Let's talk honestly about the help. Let's acknowledge, quite plainly, the quietest and perhaps truest luxury of the entire household: other people's labor. Your immaculate home, despite the self-cleaning oven's very best efforts, does not actually clean itself. A cleaning woman comes by once a week to vacuum the endless expanse of shag carpet, polish the wood paneling down in the basement, and restore some semblance of order to a house full of people who manage, quite reliably, to create disorder as though it were their full-time profession. Let's recognize this arrangement, honestly, for exactly what it is: the oldest and truest luxury there has ever really been, older by far than any single gadget in this house, older than any appliance sitting in the kitchen. Every single machine you own promises, in its own way, to save you some measure of labor, and each one genuinely does a little. But the single most complete way to be entirely free of labor is not, in the end, to buy some new machine to perform it. It is, instead, to simply pay another person to do it for you. And that particular arrangement is a luxury of an altogether different and considerably higher order. All the humming appliances in the world still leave behind a house that must eventually be cleaned by somebody. And the true, genuine mark of real wealth is quite simply that you are not the one doing the cleaning yourself. And so, once a week, the cleaning woman arrives. She comes in the morning and moves steadily through your entire home with the practiced, unhurried efficiency of somebody who does this exact work for a living. And she performs the labor that a family of your particular standing has simply stopped performing for itself. She drags the heavy vacuum across the vast, seemingly endless expanses of shag carpet, waging the same endless war against a floor deliberately engineered to resist being cleaned. She dusts and polishes the acres of faux wood paneling down in the finished basement. She scrubs the bathrooms thoroughly, wipes down every inch of the avocado-colored kitchen, and generally restores a sense of order to a home occupied daily by people who, between her weekly visits, create disorder with genuine, consistent dedication. The relationship itself is a particular kind, familiar, in certain small ways, and yet clearly distant in others. She is inside your home every single week, moving among your most private and personal belongings, and yet she is not family, and both sides of the arrangement understand this precisely, without either one needing to say so out loud. She has developed her own particular way of doing things, her own system entirely, and a wise household learns over time not to interfere too much with it. She knows, quite often, where everything in the house properly belongs better than any member of the family actually does. Over the years, she gradually becomes a genuine fixture of the household, a steady, reliable presence, and a good one once found is treasured and held onto carefully, because a cleaning woman who is honest, dependable, and thorough turns out to be worth considerably more than any single machine you could ever hope to buy. And she is, quite often, only the beginning. A truly comfortable household of this era tends to accumulate an entire small constellation of hired help, each one attending faithfully to some particular corner of the family's life that nobody in the household would especially care to handle personally. There is the lawn service, arriving regularly to mow, edge, and trim the yard, so that no member of the family ever needs to push a mower across the grass under the summer sun. There is the pool man, who comes by to carefully test the chemicals and skim the leaves, performing whatever arcane maintenance is required to keep the backyard rectangle of water reliably, dependably blue. There may well be a handyman on call for anything that breaks, and a babysitter reliably on speed dial for the evenings when the adults head out for the evening themselves. A whole quiet network of other people's hands, in the end, keeping the entire machinery of your comfortable life running smoothly. Day after day, largely unseen, because here finally is the deepest truth about wealth itself, the one all these appliances and all these cars and all these houses were really only circling the entire time. The true luxury was never really the gadgets themselves, marvelous as every single one of them genuinely was. It was time. It was the ability to hand off the tedious, tiring, endlessly repeating labor of daily life, the cleaning, the mowing, the scrubbing, the skimming, to somebody else entirely, and to spend the hours you personally reclaimed doing precisely whatever you pleased instead. Everything else in this house that you bought was, in the end, simply a thing. This, quietly, was freedom itself, purchased by the hour. And the very final expense, the one rich families of this era poured the most money and attention into by far, was not really a thing at all. It was the children. Let's talk, finally, about the kids. Into the children of a wealthy 1970s family, money is poured, quite steadily and quite deliberately, like water. There are braces, gleaming, expensive, slowly straightening a set of teeth over the course of several long years of regular orthodontist visits and strictly forbidden caramels. There is private school, or at the very least, the very best public school that the right neighborhood, chosen quite carefully, could quietly buy access to. And in the summer months there is camp, where the kids are shipped off happily to canoe and weave lanyards and generally have the time of their young lives, while the parents, back home, enjoy a blissfully, gratefully quiet house. Let's begin with the mouth, because the braces are, in their own way, among the most visible and longest-lasting of all these investments. To straighten a child's teeth properly in this era meant spending a genuine fortune over the course of several years. A long, patient campaign of monthly visits to the orthodontist, of small tightenings and careful adjustments, of a child's mouth filled with metal wire, and the small, persistent ache of individual teeth being slowly and deliberately moved, month by month, into their proper places. The child endures the discomfort, gives up the caramels and the chewing gum and the sticky taffy that would wreck the whole apparatus entirely, and the parents, for their part, quietly endure the mounting bills. And at the very end of several years of all this, a straight, gleaming smile finally emerges, a small, perfect thing that announces quietly and permanently that this is a family capable of affording to fix something that never strictly needed fixing in the first place. Then there is the matter of education, into which even more money still tends to be poured, because nothing quite signals a family's true priorities the way the lengths it goes to for its children's schooling does. Perhaps this means enrolling them directly in private school, complete with tuition, uniforms, small class sizes, and the clear promise of a path toward a genuinely good college down the road. Or perhaps it means something considerably subtler, and honestly no less expensive in the end. Simply buying a home in exactly the right neighborhood, situated in exactly the right school district, so that the public school your children happen to attend is, quietly, already the very best one available in the area, its quality effectively purchased through the price of the house itself rather than through any tuition bill. And in the summer, once school finally lets out and the children are suddenly, alarmingly home all day long, the wealthy family of this era has a solution readily available that the ordinary family simply does not, and it is called summer camp. The children are packed off, often for weeks at a time, to some rustic retreat set beside a lake or tucked away in the woods, where they swim and canoe and ride horses, and weave endless lanyards out of brightly colored plastic string, learning independence and outdoor skills, and a fair amount of genuine homesickness, all in fairly equal measure, supervised the entire time by a rotating cast of cheerful counselors somewhere else entirely. The benefit to the children themselves is genuinely real, a real adventure, and a real rite of passage in its own way. But let's be honest, too, about the benefit to the parents, which is equally real, even if it's rarely spoken aloud quite so plainly. With the children safely away at camp, the house falls blissfully, wonderfully quiet. The parents enjoy several weeks of genuine peace, of real adult time, of a home that somehow manages to stay clean and calm without any real effort. And they enjoy every bit of it enormously, feeling only slightly, briefly guilty about how much they enjoy it, before quietly sending their children off to the very same camp again the following summer. All of it together, the braces, the schooling, the summer camps, adds up in the end to something considerably larger than the simple sum of its individual expenses. Raising a child well in this particular era was its own distinct kind of luxury, an investment measured not in dollars alone but in decades, in the slow, careful shaping of a young life toward every possible advantage available. It was, in the end, the single most expensive, and quite possibly the most genuinely hopeful, purchase a wealthy family of this decade could ever make. And on that particular note, we have now toured the entire shimmering, wood-paneled, avocado-tinted dream from top to bottom. So there it is, a whole shimmering little world of avocado-colored appliances, gently wobbling waterbeds, and carpet deep enough to genuinely lose a small child in. You spent your day sloshing quietly awake in a heated lagoon, commanding the very temperature of the air in your own home from a single sacred dial mounted on the hallway wall, crushing your own garbage into small, dense bricks for reasons nobody could ever quite fully explain, and announcing that dinner was ready through a crackling little box built directly into the wall, like the captain of a particularly well-carpeted airplane addressing the cabin. You paid actual money for television. You crushed your own ice by hand. You waved a freshly developing photograph around in the air as though that somehow helped it along. And through all of it, quietly, you remained the envy of the entire street. It is easy enough to laugh at all of it now, and we have gently all evening long. The pointless machines, the fake wood glued carefully down the sides of everything from the kitchen counter to the family station wagon. The fondue set, used faithfully twice a year at most. The second refrigerator, kept purely for soda. It was excess in many ways, simply for its own sake, comfort piled steadily upon comfort, until the piling itself quietly became the entire point of the exercise. And yet, underneath all of the smug little luxuries we've spent this whole evening wandering through, there was something rather sweet about the whole enterprise if you look at it closely enough. These were, after all, simply people who had worked hard themselves, or whose parents had worked hard before them, and who wanted, more than almost anything else, to be comfortable and to feel modern, and to give their own children straight teeth, and a warm house, and a quiet summer spent beside a lake somewhere. They were reaching, in their own wood-paneled, avocado-colored way, for the good life, and for one golden, sun-warmed decade, they genuinely caught hold of it. So tonight, As you lie there in your own bed, in a home quietly humming with conveniences that would have thoroughly stunned even the wealthiest family of 1976, perhaps spare a small, fond thought for them. For the father quietly guarding his thermostat like a small household treasure. For the mother crafting her perfect answering machine greeting, "Take 11." For the children, riding backward in the way back of the station wagon, waving cheerfully at strangers on the highway behind them. They chased comfort with absolutely everything they had, and in doing so quietly, patiently, they helped build the soft, warm, effortless world you are drifting off inside of right now. Because the truth in the end is simple. The future they were reaching so hard for eventually became your own perfectly ordinary Tuesday. And that, more than any wet bar, more than any wobbling waterbed, is the real luxury of all. So settle in now. Let your eyes fall gently closed, and sleep well. You already have the good life. You simply don't have to rake it.